I guess I should say, is the James Bond franchise dead now that Amazon is more deeply involved? And one of the things that we've heard, there's a lot of stories about this. I'll bring up one of them, but the main thing is they're going to the thing that made James Bond special. It was not always around. There were movies maybe every 4 years. Rob, you probably know better than I. 3-4 years. I mean, it wasn't.
Well, it used to be 2.
Yeah, it was like the James Bond films, and they would even take a break when they would recast James Bond, like it'd go away for a couple of years. There's a big deal about who is the next James Bond. James Bond has always been a special franchise. It's one of the longest running, if not
63 years.
Yes.
Oh,
longest
up until
franchise.
now.
I mean, as a film franchise, it is the longest running. I mean, I can't think what else comes close.
Well, the longest running, especially, I mean, there's been other films that have been made from characters, but the only single, it started, Dr. No was released in 1962.
Yeah, so look at that rich history. So that made it special. You get a couple years between each movie and a break between each recast of James Bond, and James Bond went through eras.
But only 2 years, Chris.
Yeah.
When Sean Connery's last official Bond movie was 71's Diamonds Are Forever, and Roger Moore took over in 73 with Live and Let Die. And in 74, Man with the Golden Gun came out, and then in 77, Spy Who Loved Me came out. And up until 1989, 3 years was the longest there was ever a break from 1962 to 1989.
Robert,
But
I used to have a box set.
James Bond always felt like an event because it wasn't always around as, quote, content. What has been said in a lot of the things that have leaked is that we're going to get a lot of James Bond content, maybe spin-offs, a game show. Will they do some streaming series about M?
No, Moneypenny.
Or a show about the people that make the gadgets. What is going to happen? What is your take on it? We can get into a little of this story here, but I have concerns.
I haven't seen a James Bond movie since Skyfall, so I'm just not a big fan of Daniel Craig. I still say justice for Timothy Dalton. We should have got way more Timothy Dalton Bond movies.
There was going to be, but there was a legal problem with Kevin McClory and MGM, which the franchise was gone for 6 years.
Badger, if you would read these first couple paragraphs so we have the context, and then we'll get into it.
Amazon MGM Studios' Michael G. Wilson and Barbara Broccoli have formed a new joint venture to house the James Bond IP rights, under which Wilson and Broccoli will cede creative control to the franchise to Amazon. All three parties will remain co-owners of the long-running series, but this marks one of the biggest creative shifts in James Bond's history. Terms of the transaction were not disclosed on Thursday, even though we heard that it's $1 billion they got paid off. The franchise has been in the hands of creative individuals since Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman purchased the rights to Ian Fleming's novels in 1961. After Broccoli died, his daughter Barbara took over alongside his stepson Michael G. Wilson.
Read these two paragraphs and we'll stop there.
My life has been dedicated to maintaining and building upon the extraordinary legacy that was handed to Michael and me by our father, producer Cubby Broccoli, Parvis said in a statement. I have had the honor of working closely with 4 of the tremendously talented actors who have played 007 and thousands of wonderful artists within the industry. With the conclusion of No Time to Die and Michael retiring from films, I feel it is time to focus on my other projects. Now that's Barbara. Notice she didn't say anything about Amazon in that statement. Here's Wilson. With 007, with my 007 career spanning nearly 60 incredible years, I am stepping back from producing the James Bond films to focus on art and charitable projects. Therefore, Barbara and I agree it is time for our trusted partner, Amazon MGM Studios, to lead James Bond into the future, Wilson added. And,
well, that's kind of all you need to know about this. Where does this? I'm first of all, we've seen what happens when corporations take over IP. We've seen what has been done to Star Wars. I can only think of Vito Corleone looking over Sonny's dead body. Look what they did to my boy. That's what I think about when I think about Star Wars and Disney. What's going to happen to James Bond? Because
they got this in 2022. They paid $8 billion for this. And on top, but Barbara has been fighting them for doing the dumb shit like the Moneypenny series and all the other things. And she just got paid $1 billion to go away. They can do whatever they want now.
Essentially, I want to hear everyone. I want everyone to chime in on this.
Honestly, man, I think, and this is a really, I don't know if it's a hot take or not, but I just don't think we need James Bond anymore, if we're being honest. And the reason why I say that is because we're never going to get hear me out. We're never going to get the Bond that we all love, right? The one we grew up with. We're not going to get the smoking, drinking, womanizing. We're not going to ever get that kind of Bond again. So why even do Bond at all? Right? We're living in a different era. They're not going to give us a masculine Bond. They're going to give us a sensitive, a guy who's in touch with his feminine side. They're going to give us all this garbage, and he only kills when he really, really has to, right? That kind of thing. We're never going to get Bond again. Though that era of man, the studios won't touch that anymore.
I think that the only way you could do Bond now is make it a period piece. Make it like
Cold War, basically post-World
War II.
What's
that French series?
But it started
French
as a
series. Rob, you know what I'm talking about? What is that?
OSS.
OSS. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a French.
right over there.
Yeah, it's a French series that is like a really sexist, womanizing. It's great though because it's of the era. It is a period film, but
Chris, that they don't want to do that. They want to do current era Bond. But what I'm saying is we're not going to get. Actually, we are going to get current era Bond. That's the problem.
Yeah, Amazon has
we're going to get modern day Bond.
That was the problem with the whole Daniel Craig run. Other than Casino Royale, they wanted. But Chris, and I got to agree with Verbal. I mean, if you think about it, as M said in 1995's GoldenEye, that James Bond is a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War.
Yep.
Which is exactly, I mean, James Bond was written in the 50s by Ian Fleming, who fought in World War II, as sort of this fantasy figure and became beloved by middle-class men who had settled down with families after coming back from the war. John F. Kennedy, for instance, loved James Bond. And in the 1960s, provided that fantasy figure that men who had now settled down to raise families dreamt of being. Most people didn't fly intercontinental back then, and James Bond was globe hopping. The man was one day away from losing his life, so he knew everything about the
banging hot chicks left and right.
Yeah, he drank champagne at the perfect temperature. He knew where beluga caviar came from and what region. He slept with the most beautiful women in the world unapologetically, and if one was able to save him from being protected by getting smacked in the face, he would throw that woman, for better or for worse, to take the blow for him. I mean, he knew he was going to die. So he had a license to kill. That world is gone. And if you look at the Bond I'm sorry, I'm a huge James Bond fan from little kid. I've read way too many books about this movie series. But if you look at the Bond films in the 60s, they set a trend and a tone. No one had ever seen movies like this before. There were so many Bond pretenders to the throne. There was everything from Dean Martin and Matt Helm to the OSS movies to James Coburn and the Our Man Flint series. James Bond was the movie franchise in the 60s. But by the 70s, Bond was tired. And then you had Bond chasing trends. He made a blaxploitation movie in Live and Let Die. He made a martial arts movie where he went to the Orient and Man with the Golden Gun, even though he'd been there for You Only Live Twice. And then he went all fantasy with Spy Who Loved Me. And then because of Star Wars, he went into space because of Moonraker. Then they tried
I will defend that movie.
He's attempting re-entry.
I love Moonraker. I don't care what
I love Moonraker too.
And then they tried to pull back, and Bond has always been playing catch up. Quantum of Solace, they re-edited that movie so it was like a Bourne movie, even though it wasn't shot that way, so it didn't work. And then they had to deal with the writer's strike. The Bond franchise is played out. It's played out. You can't, the emo Bond with the Craig era, they tried to make it like a multiverse and have everybody, if Blofeld was pulling the strings, they tried to retcon all that BS. Casino Royale is a great Bond film. Goes back and tells his origin story. It's a prequel. Really effective. But by the time you get to Skyfall, which is $1 billion movie, that's a movie literally where James Bond fails the entire movie. He
Yeah.
fails, and at the end, it turns into Home Alone, and M dies under Bond's watch. His boss gets killed because he is ineffectual.
Let me push back a second on what you've just said. I think you can do it, but you have to be bold. You could do a period James Bond, set it in the 1960s during the Cold War. And let me
have
say
6 Bond movies already set in the 60s during the Cold War.
But wait, let me get this out. If you brought in, say, a Christopher Nolan, or even, dare I say, be a weird choice, but Robert Eggers. Robert Eggers, if you know anything about him as a filmmaker, he is really meticulous when it comes to language. Like the way people speak in The Witch is the way people spoke of the time. He does exhaustive research to make sure the way people act is of the era. If you were to make, when people think of period pieces, they think of Bridgerton, which is bullshit. They think of things like the costumes and the settings. But what about the attitudes? Can you reflect the real attitudes of the era in a period piece and make that okay to look at? Like, look, we don't think that way now, but this is how Bond treated women back then.
But we have that though in Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, Thunderball, You Only Live Twice, in Our Majesty's Secret Service.
Oh,
There were
but
all
Robert,
period
you know,
pieces.
they have
Guy
to
Ritchie would
make
be
shit.
good too. I just think give it a shot. I think you can't do Timothy Chalamet Bond.
But you know that's what they're going to do. You know they're going to do it.
They're
We're going to
doing
get a
that.
twink.
Rami,
Bond is going to be a twink.
anyways, sorry.
Chris, the problem with the Bond franchise is the world has changed. You know, before you could have one man who was a megalomaniac, or you could have Spectre or Smersh. Smersh was the Russian bad guys. So you had these things. Now, who are the villains in our world? Everything is asymmetric. You've got asymmetric terrorists. Would you send Bond to the Middle East? Who wants to go there? You want to see Bond like at the highest levels of society, wearing tuxedos and killing bad guys and making love to the most beautiful women. How do you do that in a world where kids don't even have sex anymore?
You don't.
How
That's
do
why
you
we're saying
make Bond-
Cold
Well-
War films?
Well, look, all I'm saying is I still think the movies perform well at the box office.
They do.
It's a beloved brand, and I don't think making it modern will help. In fact, let's talk about this. Will we see in modern Bond a trans Bond girl? Will
There's
we
already
ever-
been, there's already been one in the franchise.
Yes, there has. And here it
seriously.
is. Why is there I had it all queued up. So
Irvine, nice place.
like
They did
okay.
cast a trans actress in a
Yes,
Bond
I
movie.
had it. I gotta
By the
find
way,
it.
a long time ago.
Yes, I know. Why did it do that? Here it is. I have it. So this was a long time ago. A trans Bond girl has already existed. Here we are. Tula, the
Yep.
transsexual Bond girl, the urban legend of Tula.
Okay, but you guys have to understand, like, she wasn't playing a trans Bond girl. She was just like a trans actress who played a Bond girl. No, what we're going to get is a trans Bond girl where he's going to know she's trans and he's going to make that brave leap.
Like
to-
someone who's got a bat wanger. Is that what you're saying?
He's gonna take one.
He's
for
going
the
to make that
team.
brave leap to sleep with a trans girl and make sure that everyone knows that he is down.
But
for
now
trans.
what I'm saying is they'll go full trans Bond girl. Like,
Oh, yeah,
no,
she'll have
she
full
was
trans.
She was only an extra in
She'll be a
For Your Eyes
troon.
Only.
well, there you go. But I guess that breaks precedent, right? I'm saying, what do you think they'll go full on woke James Bond and just see? I actually think if they did that, it would be unintentionally hilarious.
By the way,
If
she's
they
also
went-
the first trans woman to actually pose for Playboy in 1991.
And I assume you have the issue, Rob.
I
I'm
do
gonna
not.
just-
I probably jerked off to it though.
there you go. I do
No
get
shame.
I do get when sort of a nerd crossover in Playboy, I have those issues.
If they're passing, it counts as California straight, not gay. I've heard that's what it is.
There you go. Anyways, I'm
The
just
rule.
saying.
Is that a real term, California straight?
Oh, California
course
straight
it
is
is.
the term. That's
Never
My
heard
God,
of
where have I been living?
Sometimes you
in
strike
downtown
out.
LA. How have I never heard of this?
when I say California straight, I actually am just referring to the fact that I'm completely unfazed by gay humor or gay people or trans people. I'm very aware they exist. Where some of the people I stream with in the middle of the country, gay people, and they flip out, and it's very funny. So
Hey man, I've
California
got an
straight.
issue of Transgender Quarterly that has Dax from Star Trek Deep Space Nine on the cover. I shamelessly bought it off the newsstand.
There you go. So
That's
but
true, by the way.
with this, change with the IP and Amazon's more direct involvement, what does that mean for the future of the
Chris,
franchise?
Chris,
People are already.
Are you asking? Are they going to Rings of Power James Bond?
Yes.
Yeah.
Will they Rings of Power James Bond? And Alan, please weigh in.
Oh gosh.
Did you see Jeff Bezos ask?
I know. I mean, at least Jeff Bezos has the entire Bond gallery. There's no restrictions, so he can tell a proper Bond story. The question is, will he do it? And I don't know how much money they're going to put into it. And again, how much wokeness are they going to do? And there's a good possibility it won't be. Maybe he will tell a straight up proper Bond story. Straight up.
No pun.
The thing is, Bond as a theatrical franchise is still bankable. I mean, Skyfall was the first $1 billion Bond. Both Spectre and No Time to Die, even though they weren't the greatest movies in the world, still made a lot of money at the box office. And I think what you need, again, you need a great writer and you need a great director and you need a vision for this franchise. The problem is, as we've seen with so many of these corporations that buy these things, corporations aren't storytellers. So the real question is, like, for instance, if they made a Bond movie, would they keep the structure the same? Would you get your pre-title sequence? Would you get your Daniel Kleinman directed opening credits? Would you get the gun barrel? Would you get the theme song?
Or would it be Bond in name only?
Well, that's the thing. And remember, Bond is a literary character, and those books they haven't been always well adapted, but it's like with Professor Tolkien, you have people that come in and go, we're going to change this. We need a strong female character, so we're going to literally change Galadriel, or we're going to put Gandalf where he never existed, according to Professor Tolkien, and no one seems to have a problem with that. And then you diminish your franchise, you just chip away at it, and the essence of the reason you bought it in the first place is taken away because you didn't pay much attention. Or
for a while, weren't they trying to say that James Bond was a mantle?
People have said that,
right?
Like,
they're trying to say
it's a code name,
mantle, not his actual name. Right?
But that's just something fans. That was a fan theory to explain the continuity.
Because they used the same M actress. It was like, oh, James Bond is a name. They're just giving it.
Yeah, I mean, the Bond franchise has been always fast. How many Felix Leiters have there been?
Exactly. It was just being cute with the continuity. But James Bond is James Bond.
Yeah.
007 is something you could argue about. But even that, I would say, no. James Bond is 007.
Yeah. Here's the other thing. Like, if you put James Bond in the modern world, I've always felt like James Bond was kind of a satire of modern global politics. And I feel like, with the way global politics go on today, can you really satirize it? Is reality too out there for even James Bond?
That's what I'm saying. I don't think we live in a time where we need a James Bond anymore, man. Like, because we're never going to get the one that we want. We're never going to get the one that we grew up with. So maybe it's time to retire that character. But you know what, though? They just spent how much? 8 million or 80 million?
8 billion buying it the first
time,
and then another
billion. They're not going to let this go.
Time.
They're going to make their Bond movies and TV shows and all that stuff.
But they bought MGM for that 8 billion.
Yeah, to be fair, yes. It's the whole,
but also, we don't even have people in this country that like America.
Right.
And the thing about James Bond was James Bond's character. I mean, he worked for MI6. He worked for the Queen and country. And nowadays you have people today that the idea, everybody wants to deconstruct the societies that they grew up in, talking about how terrible the West is. I mean, I think one of the great things that Bond could be used for is to promote the values of Western civilization. That's what Bond was.
But they'll never do that, Rob. They'll never do that.
I know, but if they could, because that would be
the great evil, especially now that Trump's in office, right? Or they'll have Bond fighting Trump.
Yeah.
By the way, joining us late is Script Doctor. Script, thanks for dropping in. What are your thoughts on the James Bond franchise and its future?
Oh man, with Amazon at the reins, it's dicey there because unlike shows, say for instance, The Terminal List or Reacher, Skydance is kind of involved with that to kind of protect it, to be a bit more closer to what they're trying to get at with that show. I don't know if those protections exist for Bond with Barbara Broccoli, considering the fact that the Daniel Craig's movies, with few exceptions of like Casino Royale, and I know Robert loves an apologist for another
Quantum of Solace.
Quantum of Solace, sorry.
Which, by the way, is not great.
No,
I'm just an apologist for it.
but it does have a great opening theme. But yeah, it's just I don't know at this point. Because Jennifer Salke is not a very insightful executive when it comes to Amazon Studios show. She is the one that acts the Ryan Condal Conan series, and Ryan Condal ended up going up to Warner Brothers, and he did the new Game of Thrones House of the Dragon series, which has done great for Warner Brothers and Max. And so she missed that opportunity, and she has not really backed down from that. In addition, she's also one of the ones that is very much promoting the Rings of Power, which, I mean, I understand the restrictions that team has when it comes to what they can do, but the quality just isn't there. They're not doing anything with it. And I'm very concerned that that pattern will be repeated with James Bond, because he is such an iconic character. And to Robert's point, to everyone else who's probably listening, James Bond is the type of guy who he's an agent of the government on behalf of the government's interests with regards to the crown. Like sometimes he'll be put on a mission which he'll probably go on, like you could speculate he'd go after a bad guy who you think is doing really well for the rest of the world. But the British government is like, nope, he's a threat to our interests, so we are sending someone like Bond out to kill him. In fact, if you're to do it modern day, you would probably have someone like an Elon Musk who is trying to do a Doge thing in the British government, and the British government would send someone like James Bond to get rid of him because they don't want all that money exposed and that corruption revealed, because that's against the interest of, the crown and the British government. So that would be something that could be explored on the moral side of things, but it wouldn't be a deconstruction of the character, because that is what the character's tasked to do. He fights for king and country, regardless of what those interests are.
Well, I think it's telling that the last James Bond movie, something happened that never happened before. He died. He died at the end. Sorry, spoilers if you have not seen it. But I thought it was kind of bold. At the time, I thought, I never thought he was in peril. So they've done it one time, but it's very telling that that's how they end it, because the death of Bond on screen is really the death of this franchise.